Hello and welcome to the Happy Hour Hustle podcast with our host, Kim Bodie.
I am absolutely thrilled to be chatting with you.
Principal and fearless leader of 834 Integrated Communication. On this podcast, you're going to learn a lot about a lot, like public relations, marketing, digital, and advertising.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Forgive us if you hear some dogs in the background. We are obsessed with them, and there is a medium-sized pack at the office at all times.
Fantastic.
So grab a glass of wine, preferably one with ice in it, and learn a little something today. Alrighty, Happy Hour Hustle listeners, we are back with something a little spooky today, as I would like to say. So let's just picture this, the world, the current state of the world right now. We're talking Google and Microsoft AI battle, UFO balloons, hello, the environmental disaster in Ohio, TikTok banning in Texas. It's a lot, is it not, Kim?
It is a lot. It's kind of why we figured this would be the perfect opportunity to talk about crisis communication and what brands and companies should be doing in terms of a crisis. Because I think what happens is people are reactive versus proactive. And we talk about this a lot. Nobody wants to be in the midst of a crisis. Like, it's awful. But if you don't have a plan and a process for it, then it's going to be even worse. It's going to be compounded, if you will. And that's the thing. So there really is a few rules. Remember the acronym OAF. It's very easy. OAF, OAF. And it kind of works in this. So it stands for own it, apologize, fix it. So a big part, that's literally own it, apologize, fix it. That is how you need to respond to a crisis. So we'll go into it, a little bit, what each of that means, and then really what should be included in a process or your crisis communication plan, which we just finished writing for one of our clients. So Emma will kind of walk you through like things you need to include. And I'll just talk you kind of through what the process of it is. So I remember back in the pandemic, there was a lot of this kind of flying around. There were restaurants that weren't, restaurants or venues that were not abiding by, the rules. There were too many people weren't wearing masks. And we live in the digital age. So everything's recorded. Everything is tweeted or Facebooked or Instagrammed or TikTok or whatever. So there's literally no way you can get away with anything. You really have to just be honest, which, some people don't like to be. So own it, apologize, fix it. There's a reason I keep repeating this because it's really important that you remember this. And I'll tell you, one of the people who taught me about it was Kelly Rossman, an absolute powerhouse in the PR world. And sadly, she's no longer with us, but I like to call her the mother of crisis communication. And I don't actually care if anybody agrees with me or not. So, because it's true. So own it, apologize, fix it. So what does own it mean? Well, shit happens. We all know shit happens. The best thing you can do in a crisis as a company is own that fuck up or whatever happened. Set your pride aside, own up to it. No one cares whose fault it is or how it happened. Sort of, to a certain extent. People do love to sling mud and cast blame, but you need to immediately draft a statement. And that statement needs to have a couple components to it. You need to state what the situation is. You need to then, again, own it, apologize, fix it. You need to state what it was, own your part in it. Apologize for whatever it is that happened. I don't care if this was solely on you or not. The public perception is what matters because perception is reality.
Exactly.
Then from that, you need to fix it and you need to explain the steps that you're taking to fix it. So it's really kind of I don't want to say it's simple because it's not, because once you push that statement out there, you need to have a process for how the statement gets out. You need to have trained spokespeople. You need to know how you're going to respond to the questions. One of the first things that we do when we're brought on for a crisis, and like I said, we prefer for it to be proactive versus reactive. So we'd like all of this figured out in the beginning prior to us, getting pulled in after something terrible has happened. You look at, you have to look at like who can manage responding to the media? Who can, do we have a set of FAQs, pulled together, so we have a response for anything that we don't want to be asked, because you will be asked what you don't want to be asked. That's just a rule of the game. It's going to happen.
And also, I must say, I think one of the issues with like crisis and all of this is, like you said, have a plan in place. Like, we're saying all of this to create a plan.
Yes.
So you don't have to think about, like, imagine dealing with a crisis and then dealing with all of that.
Yeah.
In a span of however long. Like, that's just not feasible or smart for your company.
Well, and we'll link to some examples, some of our blogs that we've written on crisis communication and how crises have kind of evolved, as well as just also like own it, apologize, fix it, like I cannot stress that enough. There are so many companies that come off defensive when they push out a statement. We actually got contacted during the pandemic by a company that was getting, crucified online. And I told them exactly what they needed to do. I also told them what the cost of a crisis is when you bring in a PR firm. They said, oh, no, we're not going to do that. We'll handle it ourselves. Well, they did, and they did it poorly with a poorly crafted statement that went out much too late, that was very defensive, that blamed it on everyone else. They took no responsibility, and it literally blew up in their face. In fact, I believe the health department came in and shut them down for a matter of time. I actually don't remember if they ever reopened. But I mean, like the health department was like, we see the videos. We can actually see what's happening. Like, there's like, we know what's going on here. You had a DJ in the midst of a pandemic with people dancing with no mask on. So explain to me how, when literally the rules came out and said, you can't do that. No dancing. It's like being part of a Christian Reformed family. No cards, no dancing, nothing. No fun. So it's just, it's, you cannot hide from, social media. You cannot hide from the truth. Like,
no,
do not hide from the truth. And also, like, a crisis after the fact is going to cost you a hell of a lot more money than it would if you just brought in PR counsel prior to. Public relations agencies or professionals are meant to be your partners. They're meant to help guide you through this process because it's scary. They also are essentially like your filter. They're the ones that are going to be fielding all of the media requests. They'll be reviewing the responses that are going out on social media. They'll be training you to, interact with the media or how to like make a public statement, all of that.
No, and that, like, leave it to the right people, right? Just like if we had a client who produced Beanie Babies, we're not trying to tell them that aspect of how to run their business, but we know what we're doing when it comes to that. And by we, I mean PR professionals.
Right. Well, you have to defer to the experts again. Like, we can tell you how to navigate this process, which is very, very scary. There's like, I used an example of, somebody who like did not do it correctly. There were multiple restaurants throughout the pandemic that came forward and actually, made statements that said, hey, we know somebody was exposed. They haven't tested positive at this point in time, but for us to be safe, we're closing down for a series of days to do a deep clean, to do testing on our staff, and we'll keep you apprised, when we can reopen. That's a great way to handle it. They didn't, here's the thing, they didn't have to come forward. They could have been outed by somebody, but instead of waiting for the bad thing to happen, they said, listen, this is the truth. This is what happened. We want to protect our customers as well as our employees. So these are the steps we're taking. We crafted so many like statements throughout COVID, so many, and I think it was interesting because during that time, companies, I feel like started to really appreciate, PR professionals or, like professionals that especially, that specialize in crisis management. Because it's not something anybody wants to do, but there are some really, really important steps to take that you're not going to understand as a business owner.
No, and I remember it was in one of my very intro PR classes. There was someone from an agency and they specialized in crisis communications. And I literally was like, do you go on vacation? Like, are you just like on call all the time? Like, no.
Really are, because you never know when a crisis is going to hit.
Yes. And that's why I feel like when something comes up like within our team, it's like heads together, let's get it done. But I couldn't
Yeah.
imagine doing that
Yeah.
day after day.
No, no. Now, talk a little bit about the process because I think that's important for people to understand. Like, there's obviously the own it, apologize, fix it.
Mhm.
But there's also the like, and this is why you develop a crisis management plan. There are certain aspects to it. And Emma, will you maybe walk through a little bit like what that process looks like?
Yes. So I like to think of it kind of like a checklist, right?
Mhm. Yep.
So I think before you get to the statement, it's important to kind of cover all the bases. So who's the spokesperson, making sure we're transparent about things, kind of solidifying what the messaging is and like what the overall kind of like vibe is and like what you're sticking with, which should be the truth, let's be honest. But then also making sure an emphasis on control that like you don't feel like, I mean, obviously things are going awry and you
Yeah.
don't necessarily have control over what's going on, but you have control over how you respond to it.
Yes.
Yes, that right there. I'm like, and my therapist would give me a pat on the back.
Yes, yes. It's a lot like therapy. Mhm.
Yes. And so then I think going into the statement aspect of it, once you feel like you're on solid ground with all of that, kind of state your overarching objective. Like what is your truth? Like say it simply. We don't need
No.
exact like people can see through that.
Yes.
Identifying your stakeholders, so knowing who's going to be impacted by this, who do you have to communicate with, who needs to know what's going on, knowing the facts, I think is really important too. And just stick with the truth. Stick with the truth.
Don't overcomplicate things.
Exactly. And then, like you said, having like an FAQ ready
Mhm.
to go, both for, I think, the internal team. And then also, like you said, like knowing what the
Mhm.
media is going to ask you. And then I think, sorry, this is like weaving out between the actual statement and then also just the plan in general.
Yeah.
But social media, make sure whatever messaging you're announcing through email, the media, the press, whoever, make sure that's going on social too, because that's going to be, I think, your main audience.
Yep, that's where everybody's going to go to check first. I mean, and you're going to get crappy responses. You're going to get people that are like, we appreciate your honesty in this. We appreciate how you managed it, and you need to respond to those. Not every single one, but the majority of them. And my best advice when you're dealing with that is if you can take those conversations offline. It's important to state, clear up confusion, make, respond to the question and then say, we'd really love to be able to, get into a further discussion with this. Or, if you can reach out to us via this number or whatever, we'd really like to have, more of an in-depth conversation, just so you can show any of your customers, your like community partners, like anybody that you are not shying away from answering these questions or having conversations around it, but you're also taking it offline so you can better deal with it. Nobody needs to get into a he said, she said situation. And once you go that route, it just spirals. And you see that happen. There's a lot of good examples of that happening, I can't think of any off the top of my head, even though there's a shit ton of crises out there. But you'll see people get uber defensive. Do not get defensive. No,
Exactly. No Facebook comment fights. Like
no,
that's not cute. It's not a good look. And
no,
no, that's not the
no,
point of a
no.
crisis.
There's a time and place for that. No, I'm just kidding. There's really not. Like, I mean, it's what are you hoping to actually accomplish from arguing with your dad about a political situation? Just nothing. Just
Ooh,
nothing.
I love when I see thanks, Uncle Steve, but I'm like, ooh, what did Steve say? Let's get into
And then you're like, is the aunt gonna get involved? Is she gonna jump into it's just a bad situation to put yourself in.
we are not spiraling to that place.
No, no.
But yeah, and then also I think on that note, like when people are responding, make sure everyone is on the same page. You don't want the rogue social media manager like spewing something else. Like your team needs to be communicating. I think bottom line too, and all told the truth.
I read an article about Spin Sucks, Jenny Dietrich. If you're not following her, she's absolutely amazing. And she said when brands don't react react immediately to actions or remarks that their audiences consider offensive, they are viewed as being insensitive or even complicit in the offense. And that's very, very true. And that's why, like, as I like to say, the famous Kelly Rossman, you own, apologize, and fix. There is no wait and see. You cannot wait and see anymore. Maybe you could back when we used to fax press releases, but that's not the way it is anymore. You need to get out in front of the situation and what's happening, and you need to respond quickly. And that's why you need to have somebody internally who is the spokesperson that's working specifically with your PR counsel to review that statement, to make sure that it's factual, and then who can sign off on it quickly so it can get pushed out. This cannot go through like 14, 15 people. It is not, there's no time for a committee decision. It has to be done quickly.
Yes. PR is all about urgency.
Well, and the media is unforgiving. They just are. I mean, we all know that, their goal is to get to the truth. Their goal is to dig and dig and dig and find the meat of something, or find like the scandal. So, that's why you have to be prepared. And that's why, like, I cannot stress this enough. Put the money and investment into a crisis communication plan. Just do it. You can have, one of the things we do is we'll write up like some sample statements, and we write up like, here's what a social post could look like and things like that. Here's the elements that you need to include within a statement. Here's like you heard Emma talk about the process and the steps that you need to go through. We create checklists. So it's literally like, okay, if this person isn't here, then it needs to go to this person. And then, like so on and so forth. So you always have a step that you can take in an action that can be implemented.
Now, if you take that advice, maybe you won't need us, but you probably will want us.
Oh no, you're absolutely going to need us. And I think it's important that you do have that go between, like you want to be accessible, but not too accessible, and if you have PR counsel to manage it, then they can filter through things. They can prep you for whatever interviews are coming up. In essence, they can be the bad guy, if you are trying to manage it yourself, that's not necessarily going to reflect well on you, because you really should have outside counsel managing this for you. I think then you manage to hold yourself a little bit away from it, so you can protect your brand. Although you've already, with whatever you've done, probably damaged it, but you won't damage it anymore.
So we're talking all about it. Let's see an example of a bad crisis communication.
This one's a really, really bad one. There's more recent ones, like, the Southwest system completely failing, which they were well aware was going to happen, but then done nothing about it until it was too late. There's multiple other ones that are out there. I mean, just Google and you'll find it. This one has stuck with me for multiple years, and maybe it's because Josh, my significant other, was an airplane mechanic. But this goes back to Boeing. Boeing has more than 10,000 commercial jetliners in service. And to say that they dropped the ball around this is the biggest understatement of the year. It was only after 2 crashes that Boeing revealed that its 737 MAX planes had an autopilot system which engaged during takeoff and was subject to failure. There was not training done on this for the pilots. People died. To make matters even worse, and I mean people died, they blame the pilots. This is a technical problem that we can correct with pilot training. No, it's not. No, it wasn't. There was not a way to disengage that system. These pilots were not told that the system would engage at takeoff. So how were they supposed to know that that's what was going wrong? So they literally thought these planes flew right into the ground. There's actually a documentary on it that's eye-opening, to say the least. So it's obvious that that's a really horrible crisis. The fact is, Boeing didn't take any responsibility whatsoever. They did everything the opposite of what we've talked to you about in this podcast, which is they blamed everyone. They blamed, the pilots, who, by the way, were dead. So that's amazing. Imagine how it was for the families. Not just the families of the passengers, but the families of the pilots who were blamed for, essentially like these hundreds of people dying. So Boeing really pisses me off. I cannot cannot express that enough. They're still, I think, absolutely horrible. I don't know that they ever walked back from that. I haven't studied enough to know. I will tell you that that documentary is definitely worth a watch, but it just goes to show, that the largest of companies are not exempt for this. And in fact, you see them handling a lot of crises in the worst possible way. And they had the money to invest in a crisis communication plan, and they're just not doing it. Or you get egos, you get all these egos involved. And that's a big thing. There is no room for ego in a crisis. Zero. You need to step back. You need to evaluate. You need to shut up. You need to listen to the experts, and then you need to take action. And, I would also drive home before we let you go. I will also drive home that once you've owned it, apologized for it, and fixed it, you sure as hell better find a way to give back to the community and those who were affected. And it needs to be genuine. This should not be reactive. If you don't have some sort of program in place for community engagement or, investing back into your community, that's a whole nother, podcast that, around that. But you absolutely need to be doing something. Yeah. I mean, I hate to actually even bring this up, but everything that happened with MSU handled everything incredibly well. Sure, their system was a little clunky, but they've stepped forward. There's counseling, they put all these resources at the fingertips of the students. They are paying for the 5 that are currently still, in the hospital. And they've handled it as best as you possibly can, something of such a horrific nature. So, I mean, the world we live in is ripe for crisis. And the only thing I can say to that is preparation is your best friend. Preparation is the only thing that's gonna, protect you, hopefully, in the future. And there is no guarantees.
Period.
Yeah, that's it, folks. That's all we got. Go read all those blogs. And then call us because you need a crisis plan.
Yes, they'll be linked in the show notes. And yeah, let us know if you need a plan because we're ready.
We're always ready.
Alrighty, we will catch you on the download,
listeners. Stop doing this. Just lay down. Great, get down. Goodbye. Yeah, but that didn't feel good. Face first. Just right down. Moron.
We do have that on recording. That'll be the outro.